Welcome to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Molly Watts. If you want to change your drinking habits and create a peaceful relationship with alcohol, you're in the right place. This podcast explores the strategies I use to overcome a lifetime of family alcohol abuse, more than 30 years of anxiety and worry about my own drinking, and what felt like an unbreakable daily drinking habit. Becoming an alcohol minimalist means removing excess alcohol from your life so it doesn't remove you from life. It means being able to take alcohol or leave it without feeling deprived. It means to live peacefully, being able to enjoy a glass of wine without feeling guilty and without needing to finish the bottle. With science on our side, we'll shatter your past patterns and eliminate your excuses. Changing your relationship with alcohol is possible. I'm here to help you do it. Let's start now. Well, hello and welcome back to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast with me, your host, Molly Watts, coming to you from, it's a momentarily sunny Oregon. I'm going to go with momentarily because honestly, it's just been raining cats and dogs and cats for the last week at least. And I really don't see a big ray of sunshine anywhere in the future, but it does look like maybe we've got some dry spots coming for the next couple of days as we head into 2025. Can you believe it? This is the last episode of 2024. I am just in awe of how fast this year has gone for me, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. I hope that no matter who's listening and how you're feeling, I hope that 2024 has brought for you some personal growth. I know there's been a lot of struggle and a lot of really concerning things happening in the world around us. And still, we have to find our way and we have to create our own personal roadmaps for how we're going to navigate this world and navigate our lives so that we can become the people that we're really wanting to be. I have shared a lot this year in terms of just where I see myself going and added the Think Thursday podcasts as a way of kind of extending out into some of the things that really, really interest me about behavior change and about mindset work and about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. And I'm going to keep on doing that and keep growing in that realm as we talk about still how this relates to changing our relationship with alcohol here on Alcohol Minimalist. I still want to make sure that my voice is loud and clear for those of you that question whether or not you are capable of changing your relationship with alcohol. You absolutely are. The black and white, all or nothing, sober only edicts that kind of get pushed onto everyone from the recovery industry, from Alcoholics Anonymous. And again, I never want you to mishear me. The safest amount of alcohol to consume is 0. There's nothing that I would say except that. However, if you choose to accept minimal risk in your life, you can include alcohol in a minimal way, and anyone is capable of doing that. Anyone is capable of doing that. Now, if you have had severe alcohol use disorder, if you have developed a physical dependency on alcohol, this is not a recovery podcast, and this podcast is not for you. I am not talking to people who have been in recovery or identify as severe alcohol use disorder, who we might have called alcoholics in the past. If you are physically dependent, and there are tons of resources on how to determine if that is you, then you would want to seek counsel from your physician, from other resources that can help you. And then after that, if you want to talk about the reasons that you are wanting to include alcohol in your life, if you're doing that again, then this podcast is someplace where you can learn some facts and understand the choices that you're making if you are choosing to include alcohol in your life. And a full disclaimer, if I don't say it often enough, this podcast is intended for educational and informational use only. It is a source of entertainment, I guess, but it is not. I am not a physician. I am not a lawyer. I am not a psychologist, psychiatrist, or any of the above. And so anything that I say should not be taken as a recommendation that you would not source to your own personal care team, and people that know you well. All right. There we go. I kind of just did a full year and a disclaimer all in one fell swoop. But today we are here looking ahead to 2025, and I am delighted to share with you a conversation that I had with my friend, fellow coach, and someone that shared a lot of work with me, and I've shared a lot of work with her, Sally Smith. And Sally is a licensed therapist. She is a coach and a fitness instructor. She's based in London. She's a psychotherapist who supports people with personal development, also as a fitness trainer and body transformation coach. And she runs a program called Shred, which I have done both online and in person 4 times a year. And I really love all of our synergy that we talk about between what she talks about with her clients, both in therapy and in fitness training, as well as the crossover to what I talk about in terms of minimizing alcohol. So we had a great conversation. I would love for you to check out Shred. It's getting ready to get started here in mid-January. Doesn't matter where you're located. It's mostly an online program. I was the only person from the United States doing it when I did it. And it was a great fun to see all the UK-based information, albeit we're on separate time zones. So, you have to navigate that. But a wonderful, wonderful resource. And Sally really wanted to get on here and talk about trauma and chronic shame. And gosh, chronic shame with regards to both weight loss and alcohol use and how trauma impacts both of those. It's a really great conversation. I know you're going to get a lot out of it. And I just wish you all the very happiest of New Year's. I can't wait to talk to you on Thursday when we will be talking about January 2nd and how we're going to get going in 2025 on the Think Thursday episode. Until then, have a great week, everyone. Here is my conversation with Sally. Hey, Sally, thank you so much for joining me on the Alcohol Minimalist podcast. This podcast episode has been a long time in the making. I think first me trying to wrangle you into coming on and telling you could do this and it'll be great and we'll have fun talking about everything. But there's so much that we have to cover. And I am just thrilled to get to have this conversation with you. So talking about chronic shame, talking about the synergy between managing or minimizing alcohol and weight loss. We got so much to cover. Sally, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Molly. It's great to be here.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about how we first met and kind of where our paths first crossed and how we got connected.
Sure. Well, as I think you already said, I run a body transformation program, and that's for people who want some extra help to lose weight. And it was actually one of my Shred clients that told me about your podcast. So she said to me, "Oh, there's this lady called Molly, and she sounds exactly like you." So
I don't know that I sound exactly like you. I wish I sounded exactly like you. I love your accent. But anyways, I know. Point taken.
Yeah, not the accent maybe, but the content. Oh my God, it's so similar. So yeah, I came to check you out. And there is just such a crossover with content. So I'm talking about food, with my clients, and you're talking about alcohol. But this is actually the same psychology. It's about habit change, small steps, consistency, planning,
Mhm.
self-belief. So I actually started to follow you because I wanted some more information and support for helping my clients in therapy. So these are clients that potentially are struggling with their alcohol use. And I just think it's an amazing resource that you have, and
Aw.
so great for anyone in the helping professions like me to just understand their clients better. In my opinion, and I think perhaps similar to your opinion, is the abstinence movement. can pathologize and label people in a way that can be unhelpful sometimes. So
Oh,
your podcast,
completely. Yeah.
yeah, is offering an amazing non-pathologizing and compassionate approach. So
Wow.
thank you
It
for doing
sounds
it.
very professional when you say it that way, but thank you. I love that. Yeah, I hope that it's non-pathologizing because and certainly compassionate, but and I appreciate you sharing that perspective as a mental health professional. So, yeah, so you reached out to me from way over there across the pond and
I
we
did.
connected a bit and then I actually went on to take part in your shred program this last summer, right?
Yes, you did. And I think you really enjoyed it.
I did, and I got great results. And I think I was the only American in the group, but that was super fun because I got to see a bunch of British foods, and it was really I had a great time. And yes, I got results, and I think that's another. We'll talk about that later, but let's talk a little bit about how you personally got influenced by the podcast because you did find me, you started listening.
Oh yeah, I did. And yeah, it had some personal effects for me as well. I decided to start including some alcohol-free weekends, which is
Hmm.
something I rarely did, honestly, before. In the UK, drinking at the weekend is often quite a way of life.
Yeah.
I don't similar in the US, but yeah, that's something that I don't know, I just used to do, so that you had an effect on me. And
Hmm.
also, just the idea of sticking to a planned drinking limit was really
Yeah.
useful too. I've never really been a binge drinker, but I've certainly had times in my life where I've drank more or less. So I can really relate to the issue of falling into bad habits.
Yeah.
Um,
And how do you think it's worked for you in terms of you mentioned coming to the podcast to listen to kind of help with your clients as well?
Yes, definitely. The podcast has hugely affected my work with clients. It's such an important model, as I said before. I think it's really empowering. People start to believe they can make changes, and really importantly, that they're not sick and unable to help themselves. And I
Hmm.
just love how compassionate you are, how generous with your own story. I also read your book, and I think that this model is applicable to so many different areas. It's not just about alcohol. This is a real chance for turning personal responsibility into change.
Yeah, absolutely. I say it all the time. This is a meta skill, and once you start to practice it, it becomes so much more. It's certainly been that way for me in my life, and I've used exactly what I teach other people in terms of how they make plans and do things around alcohol. That's a lot of what I taught and what I teach. I've applied to what I did when I worked in shred too. So we'll talk about that more. One of the things I really wanted to talk about with you specifically in our conversation today revolves around really kind of the fundamental differences between coaching and psychotherapy. And I know through your psychotherapy work, you have been really interested in the link between alcohol misuse and trauma. And so let's talk about that because there is a big difference between how I work with people as a coach and how you work with people as a psychotherapist. And you're both a coach and a psychotherapist, but in your work with psychotherapy specifically and around trauma, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's such an important area, I think, for anybody who is suffering with reducing alcohol. And yeah, the link is very strong between alcohol misuse or other kinds of misuse, other substances, and trauma. There's a very well-known doctor and psychotherapist and author called Gabor Mate, who I
Yep.
would have thought many of your listeners will have heard of. He has done groundbreaking work in this field with the link between alcohol and trauma. And he says being hurt is at the center of all addictive behaviors. And I
Mm.
think that his work has done a lot to recognize that and to reduce the pathologizing of addiction. He shifted the conversation and the treatment in a more positive and compassionate way. And it's my experience that clients with trauma and with grief are more likely to look for numbing or buffering
Yeah.
sorts of activities, and then also to cling to those activities as well. So with alcohol, yeah, it's not. it's not that everybody who has trauma will have issues with alcohol, but everybody that I've met with any level of dependence has trauma wounds that have not been dealt with.
I think this is super important, understanding the why behind what we are doing, because so many people think that they develop a habit around alcohol because they just like the taste, because they just kind of, like you said, like, they go to the bar on the weekends because it's just what we do. But at the root of anyone that is misusing alcohol, typically, I agree with you, there is something there that we are trying to impact. We are trying to change how we are feeling, and we have outsourced that to alcohol. We're not dealing with something in our lives. So, why would some people with trauma turn to substances and others not? What do you think would separate them?
I think that you have to understand someone's full world during and after trauma, to understand how they managed the experience at the time and afterwards.
Mm.
What kind of support they had, how they perceived the events, and importantly, how they perceived themselves both in the world and within the events that happened. And also to know what examples they had around them in terms of family or peer groups. It's not possible to say this person would go on to use alcohol or substances and this one wouldn't. But if somebody had very little personal support or had poor social structures or role models or peers that offered an example of using alcohol as a way to cope with difficulties, then they would be more likely to use substances as a crutch for emotional pain. I also think that people who've experienced a lot of pain can be risk takers or hedonistic, like searching for the happy pill.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I definitely, as someone that grew up with someone who had who abused alcohol, I definitely saw it as was the example, right, of how she coped with negative emotions. And that certainly set me up for some misuse in my own life, regardless of not developing, whether we, a physical dependence, still even misusing or a habit pattern that doesn't serve me, right? These all of the those underlying things can all still be there. Do you see a lot of addiction behaviors in your work?
Yeah, I mean, I try to avoid the word addiction as I
Yeah,
think,
right.
yeah, it can give an inaccurate understanding of what's really going on. I think, the word addiction kind of implies it can't be recovered from, and that's maybe coming from the abstinence movement.
Yeah.
I like to use the word attachment. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
an attachment. Occasionally, I use the word dependency. I
Mm-hmm.
think only in very most extreme cases would I use the word addiction. I think that if a client has a fear of reducing their alcohol intake or the behavior, whatever that behavior is, then I think there's a sign of an unhealthy attachment to explore. Yeah, and to answer your question, I definitely do meet a lot of humans who want to distract, escape, and numb psychological pain. And everybody does that differently. It's very much a part of being human, I think. It's no different for me or for you. It's very much the human condition that we want to avoid suffering, and we are all seeking ways to avoid it.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things I try to talk about a lot, is really getting people to understand that, the human experience is actually, the human condition is includes suffering. It includes good and bad, right? And we have to be willing to explore and accept that negative thing, to be able to feel the positive too. So sometimes avoiding, numbing and buffering is certainly something that most people do. And it's something that we want to see and be able to recognize that we have the agency to change that. So tell me specifically, how would you define trauma?
Mm. Oh, it's a good question. There are so many different types of experiences that can leave a traumatic imprint. It could be like a single event like grief, or a more prolonged experience such as abuse or bullying. Trauma is the result of something that feels unmanageable and inescapable when it's being experienced. Some types of trauma can lead to a client having chronic shame. And this is a term that we use in psychotherapy to refer to when someone feels inadequate or disconnected in the world. And this can happen when a client has experienced trauma and it has resulted in them believing that the bad thing happened because there's something wrong with them. And with my clients, I see this connection in particular with chronic shame and alcohol misuse.
I really want to explore that. So let's talk about that more, please. Can you say some more about chronic shame? Because shame is definitely something that is very much associated with both alcohol misuse. People feel shame around it, but I really want to understand how chronic shame could lead to alcohol misuse.
Yeah, sure. I mean, chronic shame is when someone has a feeling of personal inadequacy in some way.
Mm,
So they think of themselves within the social world as being flawed or defective in some way. And then people gather evidence of this being flawed
mm,
using a negative bias of themselves. So they're thinking badly about themselves. So, for example, if somebody makes a mistake, those mistakes become evidence of them being less than other people rather than just being a mistake.
mhm.
And then also, in particular, shame memories could feel very, very painful to experience because for the chronically shamed, shame isn't just a moment of shame, but it's about this person's perceived defects being exposed by the shame.
Mm. Okay. So is there such a thing as normal shame?
Yes, somebody without chronic shame still has shameful moments, but
Hmm.
this won't feel to be enduring or exposing or particularly frightening. They'll be much more able to move through an experience and beyond it. So, beyond making mistakes and experiencing these normal and expected moments of shame.
Okay. So then is shame ever healthy?
Yes, definitely. Shame is very important. It helps us all to behave well in society. For us to live in groups as we do as humans, we need to be able to recognize our personal and social limits and to be able to self monitor and to adjust our behaviors, ultimately developing social conscience. So,
Right.
chronic shame is when this level of self regulation goes far beyond behaving well in groups and society. It's like a constant hiding of the true self.
Mm.
This feeling of flawed becomes part of someone's identity and core beliefs. So not a momentary thing like I made a mistake, but a more pervasive thing like I make mistakes because I'm flawed. And that's really life limiting.
Yeah, for sure. So is comparison really a part of it?
Yes, because shame in any sense is a less than position in relation to others. So I'm not as good as others. So, yes, comparison with others is likely in social situations. And then the comparison is often detrimental. But chronic shame is also experienced privately. It's like a private shame of self. So, like, I know I'm not good enough, or I know there's something wrong with me, which means there's no escape because it's both public and private, which is why I think that many people with chronic shame use drugs or alcohol. Maybe they want to escape being with themselves or as a release from uncomfortable fears and feelings.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit more about what causes chronic shame.
Mhm. I think that often it's from an experience of feeling not fully loved or accepted. It could be due to an overcritical caregiver or
Hmm.
experiencing forms of physical or emotional abuse in childhood. It could also be the impact of not fitting in with childhood peers or being bullied.
Mm.
Children who experience insecure attachments are more likely to develop feelings of inadequacy and self-doubt. This is something that comes from attachment theory, which provides a useful framework for understanding how early relational trauma leads to chronic shame.
Hmm.
So, relational distress, particularly from childhood to adolescence, creates emotional ruptures such as abandonment, rejection, betrayal. And if these experiences are unresolved, they could cause a child to believe that they're unworthy of love. And this would lead to insecurity and avoidance in relationships.
Okay, so everything that you've just talked about right now is really, I really want to highlight this because I do think this is very typical and very um, illuminating in terms of the differences really between coaching versus therapy. In therapy, you are working with these kind of childhood memories a lot, are you not, or the past?
Yes, definitely. We're definitely talking about the childhood. One of the problems, though, is that with chronic shame, it often develops quite early in childhood. and
Mhm.
people can't necessarily remember the childhood memories. If I
Mm.
said to you, what's your earliest memory? You might have a lot of memories, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But going back earlier than that is tricky. And that makes it hard to understand what messages were received from caregivers. So in therapy, we're trying to piece together what it was that could have made somebody feel different or flawed.
Mhm.
And what's tricky is that a young child doesn't have the rational and objective
Right.
thought that we're sharing now to be able to make sense of experiences. So they can't make sense of what's happening. And this experience is sort of integrated as being their fault. So it becomes a sort of knowing I must be bad, but without the rational thought to make it true.
Mhm.
So in therapy, we're working with the inner child. And it's actually possible to kind of go back in time and offer that inner child some much needed reassurances that can help to heal those ruptures.
Okay. So you're saying mostly in childhood, but are there occasions when chronic shame can develop in adulthood?
Yes, I definitely believe so. I think that if somebody has a really intense shaming experience, or if they have frequent or long-term shaming experiences. So imagine if somebody had an abusive relationship, if they were in an abusive relationship, or had some very difficult workplace situations that were ongoing, or perhaps if they lost social standing in some important aspect of their lives. I think this could be an occasion.
Mhm. And so, what do you think about people's ability to heal? Can they heal?
From chronic shame or the attachment to alcohol?
Well, let's do alcohol first.
Okay. Yes, I think you and I both have plenty of evidence that people can effectively change their alcohol use through following a reduction process with support.
Hmm.
It's everything that your podcast is about. And yeah, it's a wonderful resource that I recommend to my clients. It's about empowering people to make the shift. And with each small shift that happens, it empowers that next shift.
Okay. And so, yes, we both agree that people can overcome and heal from their attachment to alcohol. Can people heal from chronic shame?
Yes, yes, as well. People can heal from chronic shame. I think it's really important to be with a warm, present therapist that has a really good understanding. It's not a quick fix, so it requires some tenacity from both the client and the therapist for the healing to
Hmm.
take place. You need to work towards this fuller self-acceptance. So for me, this includes self-esteem work, mindset work, and looking at the way new and old evidence is integrated. Also, if possible, to give voice to the inner child. That's very helpful. If you're
Hmm.
dealing with chronic shame, it's really important to find a therapist where there is an absolute feeling of safety from shame. Otherwise, I don't think it would feel safe for the client to do the work that needs to be done.
Okay. And so, as a therapist, what do you think is the best way to find a therapist? I know people are challenged by that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's important to go into it with an understanding that it might take a few attempts to find the right therapist for the job. So I would say to people, be prepared to try 2 to 3 therapists for a good fit.
Mm.
Maybe you need like 1 or 2 sessions and try 2 to 3 therapists, and then hopefully that one will really stand out. That it's really critical there is zero experience of judgment.
Okay. And what can someone expect in therapy work? Because you just said it's going to require some tenacity. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that, making sense of the experiences that have happened, it's the missing link for a lot of people. It can literally be a sigh of relief, like, oh, that actually makes sense. I understand myself, and that can be very helpful. We're then looking at it objectively. What happened? What is happening?
Hmm.
I work with the client to understand the historic learnings and to correct, where possible, any unhealthy integrations that have happened. And then, in parallel to this, also supporting a client in the present to use their current life to recognize and to risk themselves inside of their current safe relationships, because then they're building new safe areas and they're building new information about themselves. And also helping to support a client to recognize and manage connections that might be unhealthy for them.
Hmm.
And also, the therapeutic relationship itself is very healing.
Hey there, it's Molly taking a quick break to talk with you about Sunnyside. You all know that Sunnyside is my app of choice and my recommendation for a tool to help you create sustainable change around your drinking. One of the things that I love about Sunnyside is their commitment to improving the user experience, and that has been a constant since I started working with them nearly 3 years ago now. Since June this year, they have added the Android version of their iOS app. So now it's available for Apple users and all Android users. It's the same Sunnyside experience across all of those devices. And it's just another example of their commitment to improving the user experience. Another example would be the fact that now you can set it up for push notifications. So you can take all of the daily texts, the reminders, and put them into a push preference so that you determine how you want to receive the support from Sunnyside. I would love for you to check it out. Go to www.sunnyside.co/Molly to get started with a 15-day free trial today. How do you help clients with building new skills as a therapist?
Well, therapists are we help very much in building compassionate skills, something
Mm-hmm.
that I'm afraid in the modern world so many people lack. So, this is compassion for others, but it's also how to receive compassion and also how to give self-compassion too. Anybody who has trauma in their story may have a limited emotional resilience, so therapy can help them to catch up on that learning. And
Mm-hmm.
this would mean they would be better able to self-soothe and also to be soothed without needing the buffer of alcohol.
Okay. I know there are a lot of different types of therapy. I talk about cognitive behavioral therapy and even in my coaching work. Um, but do you think there's a particular type that is best for people who have that capital T trauma in their lives?
Yeah, definitely. I would really recommend internal family systems
Mm-hmm.
and also compassion focused therapy as two
Okay.
therapeutic styles that are super helpful for trauma. And although it's not something that I've studied myself, I really believe in the research that I've read about EMDR as well, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, as being really, really good for trauma.
Okay. So before we turn our attention um, to other things here, tell me about what do you think that alcohol is doing for someone who has trauma, who has experienced trauma in their lives?
Sure. I mean, you've spoken a lot, used the word buffering. I really like that word. You know,
Mm-hmm.
the devastating thing about chronic shame is that it's actually a manifestation of a dis-ease with self.
Mm-hmm.
That the alcohol becomes a distraction or a numbing for these painful emotions that relate to the self. It's probably not even conscious, but under the surface, it's like this self-medication that then goes on to become a dependency or attachment, then
Right.
perhaps leading to overuse and a reliance on drug of choice. So that could be an unhealthy attachment to food or shopping or other unhealthy attachments.
Let's talk about how someone might, so people might be sitting here right now thinking to themselves, I think I might be experiencing chronic shame. How might chronic shame show up for people right now for someone?
Hmm. I think one of the most important things is that there would be some degree of social withdrawal. It could be showing up as some shyness or some social anxiety. As I mentioned earlier as well, there may be this degree of dysregulation, like a lower window of tolerance. So
Mm-hmm.
this across as being someone who is perhaps quite reactive or actually withholding emotions, so not easily soothed. Some people may relate to this idea of finding some part of themselves unacceptable, so like a shame about who they are. The idea of being, as I said earlier, it's a social thing as well as private, so not feeling safe in company, not physically safe, but emotionally safe.
Mm-hmm.
Might be some people pleasing behaviors to protect in that situation, or a need for perfection or control. And there may also be a cycle of feeling rejected, perhaps without any actual evidence of being rejected. And then also more rarely, this could be an internal pain that's externalized, and then this means blaming others for their problems. But all of these things are very isolating behaviors. So ultimately, it's going to leave someone feeling quite lonely within the world, even if they have a lot of people around them.
Okay. So what would you suggest as really like a next step if there is someone listening that sees or thinks they might be having chronic stress? What would you suggest?
Hmm. I think the best approach is to work in parallel with both the behavior misuse, so if it was alcohol misuse, looking
Mhm.
at that and also the psychology behind it. So, firstly, working on the practical reduction steps that you absolutely do brilliantly in your podcast, at the same time as working with a therapist as well on healing the experience of the self in the world. I think that the thing is about working in tandem with both the practical steps and the therapy is that the healing is more powerful because these successful reduction steps, however small, are creating positive self-belief. And if that doesn't happen and you're in therapy and addressing the past, but not doing the practical steps, then the unhealthy drinking itself is going to leave someone feeling more flawed, more shame.
Mm, I gotcha. How long do you think it takes to see benefits? This is but from both therapy and or work on those tactical, positive, practical steps.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure people want to hear it's a quick fix, but we all
Yep.
know that it's I really believe in taking things slowly for a longer term benefit. What I observe and also what I experience for myself is that if we have a dissonance in what we want, which is created by a desire for two conflicting things, it creates this tension. So with alcohol, the tension is wanting to reduce alcohol, but also the attachment to it. So it's the tension between those two things. And I think it's the same with weight loss when I'm helping people to lose weight. You know, it's the desire to lose weight, but also not wanting to do what it takes to lose weight.
Yeah.
And in these situations with this tension, if we try to go too fast, you get this kickback, which can set you back further. So, like when we see people hit the fuck it button.
Right.
So for me,
Right.
I encourage clients to take it slowly. Slow and steady is softer on that dissonance, on the tension. And then that allows more time for real psychological changes that gradually start to resolve that ambivalence. And I hear you talking like this when you say, I want you to start where you are, and you say, create a doable plan. That's absolutely what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think that in tandem with that, it's so that's the tactical part. And the work that I do with people in the coaching realm is to help them work on changing that underlying narrative that they have about alcohol that drives the feeling of desire to drink so that we are able to tamp down that cognitive dissonance because then we can focus on thoughts that help us build a desire for the other outcome and for that other result for a reduction in alcohol or for losing weight or whatever it is, right? And that's so there's the tactical and then there's also understanding how you're the there's when you said something about how the desire to lose weight but also not wanting to do what it takes, right? So when I
Right.
think about that, I think that there is a narrative about the whatever it takes, right? So I'll give an example for myself. When I was doing shred, i could I could absolutely tell a story to myself about how tracking calories is feels restrictive and feels hard and feels like it's just takes all the joy out of eating. Like I could tell that story, right? And when I
Right.
do that, it makes tracking, it makes my motivation to actually track calories far less. And so therefore I am far less likely to actually take the action of tracking. Similarly, if I choose to look at it and if I can change my thought process and I can say to myself, like, this is how I get results, like this is tracking and this creating a caloric deficit is how I get a result, then I'm more motivated to track and then I do track and then I get the result, right? So that's how I see all of it. It goes hand in hand, both the action and the thoughts around it. So I'm kind of I'm taking us and shifting us right now away from this work that you do as a therapist, and let's talk a little bit more about the work that you do as a weight loss coach.
Okay. Well, whilst the emphasis is different, there are some similarities. In both coaching and therapy, it's helpful to look at the roots of behavior. As you said so brilliantly just then, it all begins with that psychology. And like you, I use this mindset work, cognitive
Right.
behavioral therapy, absolutely in both therapy and also coaching. The stories that we tell are just so important to the changes that we make. In my weight loss coaching, though, there is much more work on very specific habit change skills. I'm a firm believer in marginal gains, so we only need to perhaps improve by 10% in a few skill areas that support habit change, and we can tip that balance in the right direction, and then this gains momentum. And then also, because I'm a psychotherapist running a weight loss program, I kind of do both coaching and therapy in both roles. So there's a lot of positive mental health tasks in my 8-week shred program.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some of the skills that you coach in shred? Because I know they absolutely overlap with what I teach in making peace with alcohol.
They really do. They definitely do. In Shred, I have defined 30 separate, what I call superpowers, the superpowers of Shred. And each one of those is a habit change skill for weight loss. Although, in fairness, a lot of them are,
Yeah.
it's very changeable with alcohol as well. But all 30 are really transformative things. If I select just a couple of examples, I would say personal responsibility, which sounds like an action, but I actually believe that's actually a practice that we can do to improve how
Mhm.
we are. Yeah, and then I would also say prioritization, which is harder than it sounds because if it's required to do it effectively and consistently, it again is a skill to build. And then planning and planning, planning, planning. I think that sounds a bit like you again. It's so important to
Right.
have a plan. And yeah, if you can make a bit of improvement to those skill areas, you can get the ball rolling in the right direction. As you know, Shred is a highly scientific program. The tracker that you mentioned is totally based in science, and that's really key. That's a lot of skills come from using the tracker. My clients are learning how much energy their body needs in an irrefutable way. And this understanding is priceless to make those changes to lose weight because there's no guesswork. We absolutely know what change needs to be made.
Yeah. I think that for me, so I think I knew the science, I accepted the science going in, but to have the science so clearly presented and then be able to see the results over time, and it really just it reinforced the superpower, which is one of the superpowers, which is consistency, right?
Yeah.
I talk about it all the time. I've talked about it a lot this month specifically because I've been developing a practice of consistency uh, in terms of recording my gains not weight gains, but my gains over the gaps, my gains in things that I'm achieving. And I've been recording those daily. I think that understanding the value of consistency over time is so important. And that is like that part. I mean, there's all the superpowers are great. I mean, agency, understanding how much agency you have to make these changes, and really understanding that everyone is capable of making change in their life. Everybody. We just have to do these things. We have to prioritize. We have to understand. We have to listen to our narratives. We have to be willing to delay gratification. These are, I'm talking all, I'm just mentioning different superpowers here. But, everyone on the shred that I did lost weight. And that's a pretty incredible statistic right there. So,
Yeah.
what would you say makes the program so effective?
Well, I call the program an accountability program because there's the daily diary, as you know, that is shared with both me and the buddy team on
Mm-hmm.
a daily basis, right? So you're being held accountable for the plan that's made at the start of each week, which you make yourself. It's like, as you say in Alcohol Minimalist, you got to make this doable plan. And then what I'm doing in Shred is myself and a buddy group, a small buddy group, are holding the person holding their hand accountable for that plan. And I think it's this micro level of support that's what's really needed to help that weight loss feel pain-free and
Mhm.
successful. It really cuts through the stroppy teenager sort of I can't be bothered situation.
Stroppy, that's a British word. What does that mean? What is, and what is, and are you talking about Kevin?
Yes, Kevin. In Shred, we call him Kevin. Yes, Kevin's the fuck it button.
And he's stroppy.
Yes, he's definitely stroppy. He does not want to follow the rules.
Well, I really absolutely I really enjoyed Shred. I mean, so what's funny about that? I say that now, like I say I enjoyed it. I don't know that I would have said that I went into it thinking I was going to enjoy it because it is a daily, tracking and really paying attention. But that's what I think was so wonderful is that it taught me that, and just kind of like what I say about having a plan for alcohol, like it taught me that having a plan for how I incorporate the foods that I love without overindulging in them, having a plan for how I'm going to navigate social settings with food is the same thing with alcohol. We have to be willing to find something that works for us that we're willing to keep doing for the rest of our lives. Okay. And that's, I think, what really came out of Shred for me is learning how I would want to create plans around food and track around food that I'm willing to do for the rest of my life, you know? And so that's kind of that I got out of it. So what practical advice would you leave with my audience if they want to work on either alcohol reduction or weight loss? Because we're really coming into this podcast is dropping literally right at the end of 2024. We're headed into January. It's a big month, the first month of the year. Everybody wants to start making new goals, new progress. What advice would you have?
Yeah, oh my God, I definitely agree. Both with alcohol reduction. I mean, so many people go and do dry January and they make
Yeah,
changes. It's an important time of year. I would say, firstly, either using therapy or education, any kind of education, to connect the dots, to understand the self better, to be curious and open, and to do that compassionately is really important. And then I would say, absolutely, for both me and you, we would say working with the mindset as a tool. It's absolutely the thing to use as a tool for change, the
right.
mindset. Um, I think also alongside that, it's important to learn these emotional and sensory resilience skills. How do we learn to manage difficult feelings? Because we're all, as you said earlier, we're always going to have them. So it's
Mhm.
so important to work out how to manage that without using alcohol. And then making those practical steps. So making a plan alongside accountability, keeping on track. And then, as a final point, I would just say as well, just to work on building life outside of the habit, whatever that might look like for someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are really like whether you're doing it just in January or, we don't want people to do things just in January. We want to start maybe in January, but then we want to build on something that, again, is sustainable and create sustainable change for the rest of your life. So tell me about what does 2025 hold for you?
Um, I'm currently writing my book, Shred, as I think I've mentioned to you before.
That's
So it's putting all
amazing.
of the,
Yeah.
yeah, putting all of the advice, the science of weight loss into a book that also follows the format of my 8-week program. So my plan is to have an interactive aspect to the book. So I'm hoping to find a publisher in the year ahead. I'm also doing more therapy training in 2025. I'm actually beginning a training for leading therapeutic groups, which is really exciting.
Very
And
cool.
I have my 4 Shred programs in 2025. New Year Shred begins on the 13th of January. When I mean, it's just my absolute passion and privilege to be a part of those body transformations. It's very exciting.
So January 13th, folks, there's still time if you'd like to. So you can, it's a great time to do that program and incorporate dry January because it's like you get free calories because you're not incorporating alcohol.
Absolutely.
So how would my listeners find out more about you, Miss Sally?
Well, my website is, well, you'll probably put my website in the show notes, right?
I
But my
will.
social media is at Blackheath Bootcamp, and my website is sallysmith.life for therapy.
Wonderful. So, folks, I will put all of these links in the show notes. Sally is based in London, but you do both of these things online, right?
I do, yeah, face to face and online, both the shred program and therapy, yes.
So it doesn't matter if you're here in the US or wherever you are in the world. Go check out Sally Smith and the Shred Bootcamp program and everything else that's happening over there. I can't wait for your book to come out.
Oh, thank you so much, Molly, and thank you for having me today.
It was a joy. It's always a joy to get to talk to you. And I wish you all the very best in 2025, my friend. And I just appreciate you being here.
Thank you, you too.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Take something you learned from this week's episode and put it into action. Changing your drinking habits and creating a peaceful relationship with alcohol is 100% possible. You can stop worrying, stop feeling guilty about overdrinking, and become someone who desires alcohol less. I work with people in 3 ways. You can learn about them over at www.mollywatts.com/workwithme. Or better yet, reach out to me directly. It's molly@mollywatts.com. We'll jump on a call and discuss what's best for you. This podcast is really just the beginning of our conversation. Let's keep it going.